All right. All right. Thanks everybody for joining. Um, we are recording this webinar, so don't stress about memorizing everything you see. In addition, we'll be providing the slides to everybody afterwards. So again, don't have to take screenshots or anything like that. We'll provide you with all the information afterwards via email. Getting the recording to you might take a little bit, but just be patient and we'll get them to you. The biggest piece of information, if you walk away with absolutely nothing else from this webinar, is really just to know that you can always contact me to set up a call, to follow up, to ask additional questions. That's really what I'm here for, is to talk to you about your project, whether or not it's the right fit for this opportunity, or if not, I can try to connect you with someone else who can. But really, we at NIH are not scary. We're here to help you. And I probably should have introduced myself. My name is Natalie Trzynski. I'm a program director at the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, or NINDS. And I'm also a program director with the Brain Initiative um, program, and specifically, I help run the brain dissemination and this particular funding opportunity for brain technology dissemination partnerships. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay. And again, if you could walk away with one thing from this webinar besides the fact that, you should contact me if you have any questions or you want to talk more. It's the fact that you should read the funding opportunity. Everything that I'm going to be saying here is all written out in the funding opportunity. It's all there. There's nothing groundbreaking or new that you're going to hear here that you wouldn't know from reading the funding opportunity. But I'm really just going to be highlighting the top things for you to really pay attention to, because I realize it's dense and it's kind of long, and there's a lot of things in there that we sort of have to put in there. But the purpose of this presentation is really just to highlight the things that I think are the most important to you. But really, you should really read the funding opportunity from start to finish if you want to apply for these. And the next thing I just want to note is to apply early, and also contact us early if you want to chat about your project. Ideally, if you want to have a talk with me about your project, contacting me at least a month before the due date is best practice. And again, you should also think about applying early. At the end of the presentation, I'll kind of explain to you why that's a good idea. Next slide, please. All right. And just another little piece of housekeeping. We will have time to answer some questions. You should just put your questions in the Q&A box that you should hopefully see on your Zoom screen. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can. If we can't get through all of them, again, I'll be following up with everybody afterwards, and I can answer some of the questions that we didn't get to in that email. So again, don't stress if we don't get to your question. All right, so just some background about this funding opportunity, why we developed it, what the goals of it are, because I think that'll really hopefully help you put together a good application for it, to kind of understand where we were coming from when we developed this. And I should note that one of the things that drove putting this together is the fact that our multi-council working group that is advisory to the Brain Initiative really stressed the idea of supporting partnerships between less resourced and resource-rich institutions. And in particular, they called out the importance of ensuring that both parties benefit from such programs. So the long-term goal of this funding opportunity, as you can see here, is about increasing the impact of the BRAIN initiative through dissemination and integration of validated tools to investigators at institutions that historically have not been major recipients of NIH support. Here they're being called resource limited institutions, or you might see the acronym RLI used throughout this. Um, and, you know, the BRAIN Initiative has been historically really involved with creating really cutting edge, or as our director likes to say, bleeding edge neuroscience tools, really at the, you know, forefront of innovation. But it's really key that those get out there to the neuroscience community and get utilized in research. And, you know, in particular, just, you know, get out there to as many people as possible, not just to, you know, the friends of the inventor or, you know, just their buddies down the hall, but really gets to everybody that could benefit from cutting edge neuroscience tools. Um, and in the short term, our hope with this opportunity is to support collaborations between investigators at resource limited institutions, or RLIs, and brain technologists to facilitate training and use of brain initiative technologies in the recipient laboratories. And again, we wanted to stress the importance of this two-way knowledge transfer between the investigator at the RLI and the brain technologist, with a situation where both parties really benefit from that. I do want to note that all of this was driven by data, where we found that in our portfolio of grants that was supporting dissemination of cutting edge brain initiative tools, we saw there was greater institutional diversity among outreach attendees, that is, people who were you know, attending trainings or workshops or office hours, versus those who were identified as users who were really incorporating the technology in their everyday research practices. So and in particular, we saw lower percentage of users from resource limited institutions versus outreach attendees. So that suggested to us that there was an interest in investigators from RLIs, but it wasn't 100% translating into adoption of these technologies. So that's really kind of what spurred us to think about creating this opportunity to support these collaborations. And in particular, I want to note that, you know, this importance of this two-way knowledge transfer, where the PI at the RLI learns about the technology, incorporates it into their research practice, while the technologist learns how to support dissemination to a broader group of users. And, you know, these collaborations could lead to the PI at the RLI receiving more research support for use of the brain technology, and it could also expose more trainees to brain initiative technologies via an untapped resource of PIs at RLIs. Next slide, please. All right, so again, kind of following up on what kind of the focus of this funding opportunity is, what are the activities that we expect from here. We have a primary focus of the activities being investigated, initiated exploratory pilot efforts, which lay the groundwork and establish feasibility or validity of future large-scale research projects utilizing the resource, and or innovative dissemination of the resource at the RLI with a plan for long-term integration into training programs. And I really want to highlight that and or part of it. There's not a requirement that you have both things, that you have, you know, building, you know, a research program around this resource, and involving trainees in it. It could be just one of these things. This is kind of in contrast to, I think, some of the R15, R16 mechanisms that you might be familiar with out there. But the key part of this is the sustainability of utilization of the resource, that the cutting edge brain technology is going to continue to be used at the RLI, either in training or in research programs. So that's really one of the key things to be thinking about. In terms of what kind of activities we expect that will be supported here, it could be for travel, it could be for buying reagents, it could be having students participating in the research. It could be minor adaptations of the Brain Initiative resource to meet the needs of the user. But in particular, I want to highlight that this is not for significant technology or software development of the resource. The resource should really be kind of ready to go. We don't want situations where the PI at the RLI is kind of the guinea pig, if you will, trying to work through a technology that's really not ready for dissemination. But it could be, kind of minor changes, that maybe only take, a couple months or so to make the technology work for the PI at the RLI. And in terms of the award budget, it may not exceed 3 years, and the direct costs are limited to $225K per year and $450K over the entire period. So again, the expectation is that this is not going to be for really big equipment purchases, really big kind of institutional capacity building kind of things. There's other opportunities for that, a lot of NIGMS funding opportunities that are specific for that capacity building. This is really about one-on-one collaboration, personnel time to really work through utilizing this resource in a novel way. And just it's, kind of to get you a feel for some potential activities. This list is definitely not exhaustive. It's just kind of give you a sense of some of the things we think about. It could be addressing technical or conceptual challenges or barriers. Could be to prove viability of the technology necessary to enable a new approach or experimental design, or to develop experimental capabilities or theoretical frameworks. What I often tell people who are, haven't heard of this mechanism before, the R34, is very similar to an R21. So there's a lot of, thinking about like that preparation for something bigger, is something exploratory, pilot sort of things. That's one of the key sort of things in this funding opportunity. Next slide. All right. In terms of the requirements to participate in this funding opportunity, the contact PI or the user, if you will, of the Brain Initiative technology has to come from a resource-limited institution. And in this case, we've defined RLI as an institution that awards undergraduate or graduate degrees in biomedical sciences, and at the time of application has received no more than $7.5 million per year from NIH research project grants in 4 of the last 7 preceding fiscal years. Yeah, I'm happy to kind of follow up with you if you need help determining if your institution is eligible. I would say, again, if your institution is used to the R15 or the R16 mechanisms, most likely you would be also eligible for this opportunity. In addition to the contact PI being from the RLI, again, we did that thoughtfully, with the idea that the contact PI at the RLI is really the one driving the project. The award will go to them, it will go to their institution. but then there is an expectation that there is key personnel on the proposal that includes someone from the Brain Initiative resource team. And it should be somebody who is, really well versed in that technology. We have limited it to technologies that um, are on this list here. That they're on the Brain Initiative Alliance developed resources website, or they've been funded through our Brain Dissemination U24 program. That's really, again, to hopefully kind of make it clear that we want this to be limited to well-developed resources. The PI at the RLI is not a guinea pig to something that's not never been tested before this. I do want to highlight the fact that the key personnel on the Brain Initiative disseminator side doesn't necessarily have to be the inventor of that technology. It could be, say a program manager or, some other sort of support staff who's, the most important thing is that they're really well versed in the technology, and that they're really willing to work with the PI at the RLI and help understand how to make this technology work for their needs. So again, it doesn't have to be the person who invented the technology, who might not say have the bandwidth for it. It could be somebody who's more on the support role, if you will, on the technology side. Next slide, please. All right. I always like to highlight for people what's considered a non-responsive application. This is really kind of the bar that will get your application through to review. And I always hate to see situations where somebody does all the work, puts everything together. It's not trivial, and then their application gets withdrawn before it even gets to review. That's just a really sad situation. We don't want that to happen. So I really like to highlight what is considered non-responsive for this funding opportunity. And I would say for any funding opportunity, you should definitely always look at those non-responsive criteria. So as I noted before, you have to have you have to be utilizing a resource that is determined to be well validated, in that it's either listed on the U24 program website or on the Brain Initiative Alliance website at the time of application. So again, and then again, really not about novel or unproven technologies. This will not support clinical trials or patient services. Again, you need to have that person who is key personnel who is associated with disseminating the Brain Initiative relevant resource as key personnel. If you're not sure, again, can't stress enough, let me know before you go through all the trouble trying to put an application together, if you are worried that you might not be responsive. So definitely reach out to me. Next slide. All right, so now I'm going to highlight putting together your application. What are kind of the key things to think about as you're putting everything together? And in addition, I'll also be going through the review considerations. And what you'll see is there's really a very close tie here, kind of a one-to-one mapping of what's asked for in your research strategy and then what the reviewers are asked to look at. And again, this is always just a good, I think, strategy for you to really look at what are the reviewers going to be asked to consider, and really tailor your application around that information. So I want to highlight the fact that the research strategy in this funding opportunity is limited to 6 pages, with the idea that, hopefully it's kind of reduces the burden a bit, if you will. We are not expecting preliminary data. In particular, we are looking to support novel collaborations, new uses of a technology. Situations where, you've already got the cutting edge tool working in your lab, it's kind of, what's the purpose of this? This is really about something new. That being said, there has to be demonstrated feasibility that the research strategy is going to work at some sort of basic level. It's kind of a balance here. Again, we're not expecting preliminary data for use of the Brain Initiative technology, but depending on how sort of risky your proposal is, some preliminary data might be a good idea to establish feasibility in terms of one of the factors. And in particular, I want to just highlight what you should think about as you're writing your research strategy. I've kind of highlighted the fact of the mutual benefits that both parties expect to derive from this partnership, that the technology is ready for broad dissemination. Again, we've limited it to these kind of vetted technologies, but at the same time, you should still kind of show that it's ready for broad dissemination. It's ready to come to the PI at the RLI, and that it provides a value beyond currently available facilities and services at the RLI. The idea that if this were to be funded, what can the PI at the RLI do that they would not be able to do otherwise? In terms of the activities, as I mentioned, it should either be establishing feasibility, validity, or technically qualifying result that, if successful, would support subsequent research projects using the selected Brain Initiative resource. Again, you might think of it as, setting you up for the preliminary data, say for an NIH R01, using the Brain Initiative resource, continuing to use that in that future bigger scale project. Doesn't have to be an NIH R01, but again, just kind of giving you a flavor for what we see as, a success of this program. Or it could be utilizing trainees at the RLI who will gain an understanding of the use and limitations of the Brain Initiative resource and get hands-on training on how to execute, analyze, and report research using the resource. And again, the idea being the sustainability of this. How will future trainees continue to utilize this Brain Initiative resource after this funding is over? So that's kind of one of the key things that I talk with people the most about this is, this being a planning grant, this being an exploratory pilot program, kind of giving hints on what the future steps would be at the end of the funding, highlighting, what could be accomplished with this, and then what would the next steps be if the research strategy were successful. So again, the impact of this is about novel, sustained integration of the proposed resource into research practice. And in cases where you're utilizing trainees, you're utilizing developing a training program, say developing a course, something like that. What is the sustainability of such training? How will that training continue to be used after the R34 period of support is over? Next slide. All right. So again, I wanted to highlight what the reviewers are asked to look for. This is using the new simplified review criteria framework. with 3 factors. The first factor being the importance of the research, which includes the significance in the innovation. This is scored on a score range from 1 to 9. And in particular, I wanted to highlight what are the specifics for this funding opportunity that reviewers are asked to look at. And these should all, if you've been listening to this presentation, these should all not come as a surprise. But again, this kind of tells you these are what the reviewers are asked to look at in addition to kind of the standard review criteria for factor 1. For this, they'll be asked to evaluate the likelihood of sustained integration of the proposed resource into research practice, evaluate if the resource is developed to an appropriate stage, if it's been validated and the technology is ready for dissemination, and evaluate if the collaboration enables novel and innovative research and or training that otherwise would not be feasible in the absence of this mechanism. So again, one of the key things to think about is what does this particular cutting edge tool enable you to do that you could not do otherwise? So that's really kind of a key thing that I think some people need to kind of really wrap their head around is what can you do with this tool that you couldn't do with another similar type of tool that you could just get at your institution or get from another place. Next slide. All right, and then for factor 2, this is about the rigor and feasibility of the research approach, also scored from 1 to 9. And in particular for this funding opportunity, reviewers are asked to evaluate the strength and the likelihood of bidirectional feedback between the RLI user and the disseminator, and evaluate if the partnership centers on potential and capabilities of both parties. Really kind of, do they understand what both parties are getting from this collaboration? The reviewers are also asked to evaluate if the timing of milestones and the quantity of dissemination of the resource to the PI at the RLI is reasonable. And for applications where trainees and students are involved, again, not a requirement, but in cases where it is brought up that trainees are going to be involved in the research, reviewers are additionally asked to comment or to consider in their scoring how suitable the plans are for incorporating students, evaluate if there's oversight of the effectiveness of such training, and the plan for sustainability and dissemination of educational resources. Again, the idea that the knowledge that's gained will continue to be utilized broadly. Next slide. All right, and then factor 3 is not on a scored from 1 to 9. It's either acceptable or unacceptable, and this is relevant to the expertise and resources of the investigators and the environment, and it's considered in the reviewer's overall impact. It's not given an individual score. In particular, for this funding opportunity, reviewers are asked to consider if the disseminator has shown a background of service-oriented efforts and how effective they're going to be in providing the proposed resource and working with the proposed user. So, and again, I want to stress that it doesn't have to be the original inventor of the technology, but that it's somebody who is, is really willing to put in the work and work with the PI at the RLI to make this technology work for them. Next slide. All right, and just some last sort of, tips, if you will. Again, things that I always like to highlight for people to make sure that they don't get their application withdrawn prior to review. You have to have a data management and sharing plan. You'll see the requirements for that in the other plan section of the funding opportunity. In particular, this is applicable to the scientific data that are generated as a result of the research strategy. So make sure that you have that data management and sharing plan attachment there. Again, reach out with questions. You can always contact me if you have any questions, if you want to talk. And then finally, apply early. I would say submitting your full package at least a week before the due date is really the best practice. And the reason for that is that the system can check it and make sure that there's no errors in it or problems with it. And it'll give you more than enough time to correct it. If you wait until the very last minute to submit and then you get an error, you won't have the time to correct it and re-put it in the system. I also want to note a reminder that you can't have hyperlinks in your application. That's another thing that could get your application withdrawn, as well as if there's foreign involvement in your application, make sure that you have the foreign justification attachment if it's relevant to your proposal. And with that, again, I just want to remind everybody that I'm here. I want to, encourage you to reach out with questions. Again, these slides will be provided to everybody, as well as the recording when we have that available. And yeah, don't be afraid to reach out with questions. And with that, I'm going to transition over to trying to go through some of the question and answers. Just give me 1 second to pull up my information here. Okay. So I see that there was a question about, for a resubmission, do I need to include the introduction page as a regular A1 submission? And yeah, just like any other NIH application, this allows resubmissions. And yeah, you would provide an introduction to the application where you would describe some of the key things that were changed as a result of the summary statement. The next question I have here, should we include any explicit scientific novelty or experimental aims, or keep it strictly focused on technology adoption, training, and dissemination? Yeah, no, I think the novelty aspect of this is a key component to it. That idea of how this will enable something that could not be achievable otherwise. And again, that's really the sort of our hope with sort of this marriage between a really cutting edge brain initiative tool and a PI at the RLI, that they can do something new that they couldn't do before. And again, hopefully that novelty would enable future studies with utilizing the resource. Preliminary data utilizing the brain resource and the RLI lab is discouraged. Should we provide these type of preliminary data or not? Yeah, I mean, certainly, if you've already, tried out the resource, and you have that data, like, you can, and you can definitely include it. I just wanted to make it clear to people that that's not a requirement by any means. And certainly, like, if you've really, tested everything out and you've got it working, it's kind of like you're going to have to make the case of, okay, why do you need this particular mechanism if you've already got it working, right? You need to kind of make the case for what is that next step that needs to happen with the Brain Initiative resource. All right, and then there's a question here about, are EEG and FNIRS allowable resources under the Brain Initiative? Not software that can be used with these devices, but the devices themselves. I can't see any neuroimaging modalities on the list of resources. Yeah, so I mean, we are limiting it to what's on those list of resources. Um, and that's just the phase that we are at with this program, with it kind of being a pilot. First time we're doing this. We're only in our second due date right now. So again, we're kind of limited to limiting it to what's on that list of resources. But that's not to say, NIH isn't interested in other types of resources. That's just what we're doing right now for this funding opportunity at this time. Do you have any specific tips or advice for RLI PIs from primarily undergraduate institution? So in cases where presumably a future R01 as a subsequent project is not possible. Right, yeah. I mean, I just mentioned a future R01 as just, a potential success story. Certainly not exhaustive, certainly not the only thing that we want to come from this. I think in cases where it's a primarily undergraduate institution where again, if you're utilizing trainees, if you're thinking about it being more along the lines of course development, things like that, those are allowable. And I think the key thing is again talking about the sustainability of that training program. How will you ensure that it keeps getting the Brain Initiative resource continues to be used after the period of support. So I think if you decide to go that route, just make sure you kind of pay attention to that language in the funding opportunity about trainees. And are there any specific topics or areas of neuroscience that are prioritized? Yeah, so I mean, we kind of see this as really, the PI at the RLI is driving it. And I think that it's really up to them to kind of make a compelling case for this is the area of science that I want to do, and here's how I see this moving forward. So I think that's kind of the key thing to think about this. And again, we kind of want these tools to get out of the Brain Initiative and get out there into as many kind of fields as possible. So, if something's kind of being utilized in a disease-specific manner for like a specific model or specific disease-focused mechanism. Again, it's not for clinical trials, but if you're looking at the mechanisms of a particular disease, that's allowable under this. And again, I think making the case for this is how this planning grant, this exploratory grant will enable us to do further research in this area, utilizing this technology, and really kind of bringing that technology to its full potential for, say disease specific research. So yeah, so there's not, a specific type of area of neuroscience that's prioritized. All right, I think that's as many questions as I can get through right now. But again, I'll follow up with everybody with the slides afterwards, and feel free to, contact me if you have any questions. And I think with that, I'm going to close us out. So thank you guys again so much.